Maya Anderson transfers to Riverview High, only to face the subtle but relentless prejudice of her English teacher, Mrs. Thompson. Ignored and undermined in class, Maya must decide whether to stay silent or fight back against injustice. As tensions rise, her courage to confront the truth sets off a chain of events that could change schools forever. Will Maya's stand be enough to expose the bias and bring real change? Follow Maya's powerful journey, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to see what happens next. The late August sun hung in the sky like a stubborn memory of summer as Maya Anderson stood outside the front gates of Riverview High. Her hands gripped the straps of her backpack tightly, fingers fidgeting nervously as she took in the sight before her. The sprawling red brick school building stretched out along the campus, looking more like an old institution than a place of teenage learning. It was her first day as a junior, and already she felt like an outsider. Moving schools was never easy, but moving halfway through high school, that felt almost impossible. Maya had left behind the familiar comfort of her old school after her father, David Anderson, had taken a new job in Riverview, a town known for its affluent community and highly competitive schools. Riverview High was one of the best schools in the district, and Maya's father had been overjoyed when she got accepted into its rigorous honors program. She had been excited too at first, but now, standing in front of the imposing building with students milling about around her, all in cliques and groups, talking and laughing as if they'd known each other forever, Maya felt her excitement drain away, replaced by the gnawing sensation of being somewhere she didn't belong. She checked her schedule for the third time, her eyes scanning the list of classes. First period, English, room 204. That would be her first test, her first chance to see if she could fit into this new school's academic environment. English was her favorite subject. In her old school, she had been at the top of her class, always ready to jump into class discussions about novels, themes, and character development. But here, it would be different. Everything would be different. Taking a deep breath, Maya walked through the front doors, her footsteps quiet against the polished linoleum floors. The hallways were buzzing with energy as students rushed to their lockers or lingered in groups, catching up on the summer gossip. Maya walked slowly, head down, avoiding eye contact, feeling the weight of her backpack on her shoulders. She could feel people looking at her, curious stares burning into her back as she passed by, but she kept moving. She just needed to get to room 204. Finally, she found it. The classroom door was slightly ajar, and inside, students were already sitting down, talking in low murmurs. Maya hesitated for a second before stepping in. The room was neat and orderly, with rows of desks facing the front where a large whiteboard dominated the wall. At the head of the room stood a tall, slender woman with graying blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her clothes were pressed, her posture straight, and her expression unreadable. This must be Mrs. Thompson, Maya thought, trying to gauge the teacher's demeanor from across the room. Mrs. Thompson glanced up as Maya entered, her sharp blue eyes flickering over her in a brief moment of assessment. "Ah, the new student," she said, her voice clipped but not entirely unfriendly. "You must be Maya Anderson." Maya nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Well," Mrs. Thompson said, her lips curling into something that was almost a smile, "take a seat. We're about to begin." Maya quickly scanned the room, her eyes falling on an empty desk in the middle of the classroom. She hurried over, sliding into the seat as quietly as she could, her heart thudding in her chest. The other students barely noticed her as they continued their conversations, but Maya couldn't help feeling like an outsider in her own skin. As she settled into her desk, Maya took out her notebook and pen, trying to calm the nerves bubbling inside her. She knew that first impressions mattered, especially in a new environment. She had to show her teachers and classmates that she was capable, that she belonged here. Mrs. Thompson began the class by introducing the syllabus and outlining what the students could expect over the course of the semester. The tone of her voice was authoritative and crisp, as if she expected nothing less than perfection from her students. Maya had heard about teachers like her, demanding but fair, strict but caring. But as the minutes ticked by, Maya felt something else under the surface of Mrs. Thompson's words. A certain tightness in her voice, a sharpness that felt more dismissive than encouraging. "We'll be starting with To Kill a Mockingbird," Mrs. Thompson announced, tapping her manicured finger against the syllabus. "A classic American novel that explores themes of morality, justice, and—" She paused slightly, her eyes flickering toward Maya. "Race." The word lingered in the air for a moment longer than necessary. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but kept her expression neutral. She wasn't new to the subtext that often accompanied discussions about race. It was usually subtle, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but Maya was used to it. She had learned long ago how to pick up on the small cues that people gave when they thought they were clever or polite. Mrs. Thompson continued, oblivious to the momentary tension that had settled over Maya. "You'll be expected to contribute thoughtful insights during our class discussions. I don't tolerate laziness, and I expect every student here to maintain the high standards of this class." She gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I assume you're all capable of that." Maya's fingers curled slightly around her notebook, her heartbeat slowing into a steady, determined rhythm. She wasn't sure if Mrs. Thompson's comment had been directed at her specifically, but she had already made up her mind. She would prove herself. If there was one thing Maya had learned from her father, it was that hard work and perseverance could break through almost any barrier, no matter how invisible it seemed. The rest of the class passed quickly. Mrs. Thompson lectured about the significance of the novel's opening chapters, her voice droning on in a steady cadence. Maya took notes diligently, her pen moving swiftly across the page, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Maya stood to gather her things. She glanced around the room, watching as students shuffled out in groups, chatting and laughing like they'd been doing this forever. No one really acknowledged her, and for a brief moment she felt completely invisible. But she wasn't here to make friends. She was here to learn, and she would show everyone, especially Mrs. Thompson, that she belonged to. The following weeks brought a steady rhythm to Maya's life at Riverview High. She fell into the patterns of her classes, navigating the hallways with quiet determination, trying to blend in while staying focused on her work. She kept mostly to herself, eating lunch alone or sometimes with the few acquaintances she had made in her other classes. But the English class was different. English class, with Mrs. Thompson at the helm, had begun to feel like a battle she hadn't prepared for. It wasn't that Mrs. Thompson was overtly hostile, at least not in a way that anyone could immediately call out. But there was something simmering beneath the surface of every interaction, something Maya had begun to notice more and more as the days passed. At first it was subtle. Mrs. Thompson would ask a question to the class, and Maya, eager to participate, would raise her hand. Her responses were always well thought out. Maya made sure of that. She had read To Kill a Mockingbird twice already, and she had been excited to discuss its themes, especially those about race and justice, topics that resonated deeply with her. But every time she raised her hand, Mrs. Thompson seemed to glance right past her, calling on other students instead. Even when Maya was the only one with her hand raised, Mrs. Thompson would wait a moment, then ask someone else if they had anything to add, as though Maya's presence didn't register. It happened again one Thursday morning during a particularly lively class discussion about the symbolism of the mockingbird in the novel. "Who can tell me what the mockingbird represents in To Kill a Mockingbird?" Mrs. Thompson asked, scanning the room. Maya's hand shot up. She had been waiting for this moment. She knew the answer by heart, but Mrs. Thompson didn't call on her. Instead, her eyes swept past Maya's raised hand and landed on Tyler Green, who sat in the front row barely paying attention. "Tyler, how about you?" Mrs. Thompson prompted. Tyler, who had been doodling in his notebook, blinked in confusion. I guess it's just like a bird or something," he mumbled. A few students giggled, and Mrs. Thompson nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Tyler's answer. Not quite, but close. "Anyone else?" Maya's hand was still raised, her heart sinking. She wasn't invisible. Mrs. Thompson saw her. She was sure of it. But for some reason, she was being deliberately ignored. Finally, after a few more wrong answers, Mrs. Thompson's gaze flicked back toward Maya, her lips curling into that tight smile again. "Maya," she said, her voice almost dripping with condescension. "You seem eager to contribute." Maya's heart thudded in her chest. She steadied herself, trying to push past the rising frustration. "I think the mockingbird represents innocence," she began, her voice steady. "It symbolizes characters like Tom Robinson and Boo Radley, who are innocent but persecuted by society." She paused, hoping Mrs. Thompson would acknowledge her point. Instead, the teacher's smile grew tighter. "Well," Mrs. Thompson said slowly, "that's a predictable interpretation, but I think you might be missing the broader literary significance here. The novel isn't just about race, after all. There are other themes, ones that are perhaps more relevant to the universal human experience." Maya felt the words hit her like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the dismissal of her answer. It was the way Mrs. Thompson made it seem like she had somehow missed the point entirely. Maya had been careful with her analysis, had worked hard to ensure she was drawing from the text itself, but it didn't seem to matter. Mrs. Thompson moved on without waiting for a response, and Maya sank lower into her chair, her mind buzzing with frustration. She had been right. Why couldn't Mrs. Thompson see that? Why was she so determined to undermine her? That evening, Maya sat at the kitchen table, her English book open in front of her, but she couldn't concentrate. Her father was in the next room, talking on the phone, his deep voice muffled through the walls. She stared down at the pages of the novel, her mind replaying the moment in class over and over again. "Maya, dinner's ready," her father called, interrupting her thoughts. She closed her book with a sigh and joined him at the table, but the frustration gnawed at her, making it hard to focus on the meal in front of her. "Everything okay?" her father asked, glancing up at her. Maya hesitated. She didn't want to complain. Her father had been so proud when she got into Riverview's honors program. He had been telling everyone about how well she was doing. She didn't want to disappoint him, didn't want him to think she was struggling. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a lot of work." David nodded, smiling warmly. "That's my girl. I know you'll knock it out of the park." Maya smiled back, but inside she felt the weight of Mrs. Thompson's words pressing down on her. As the weeks dragged on, the tension between Maya and Mrs. Thompson deepened. The subtle slights became more frequent, more cutting, until it was impossible to ignore. Maya tried to keep her head down, to focus on her work, but no matter what she did, Mrs. Thompson always seemed to find something wrong. In the middle of October, Mrs. Thompson assigned the class their first major group project, an analysis of To Kill a Mockingbird focusing on its themes. It was a daunting task, but Maya felt ready for it. She had been quietly preparing, studying the novel in depth, and she was eager to show her understanding of the text. But Mrs. Thompson had other plans. "I'll be assigning the groups," Mrs. Thompson announced one afternoon, her eyes scanning the room. "We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place." Maya felt a chill run down her spine on the way Mrs. Thompson emphasized out of place. She knew what was coming. When Mrs. Thompson called out the names, Maya was paired with Tyler Green and Jessica Carter, two students who, to put it kindly, didn't share Maya's enthusiasm for the project. Tyler had spent most of the class either doodling or half asleep, and Jessica was more interested in gossiping with her friends than contributing anything meaningful. Maya bit the inside of her cheek, trying to stay calm. She knew Mrs. Thompson had done this on purpose, had put her with students who would do little to no work, leaving her to carry the burden of the project alone. It wasn't fair, but complaining wouldn't do any good. After class, Maya approached Tyler and Jessica, determined to make the best of the situation. "So I was thinking we could meet after school to work on the project," Maya suggested, her voice calm and steady. Tyler shrugged. "Yeah, sure, whatever." Jessica barely looked up from her phone. "I'm busy this week, but I'll figure something out." Maya felt her frustration rising again, but she swallowed it down. She couldn't afford to let her emotions get the best of her. If she had to do the project by herself, so be it. She wasn't going to let Mrs. Thompson win. Over the next week, Maya worked tirelessly on the project, researching and analyzing the novel in every spare moment she had. She put together a detailed presentation, complete with visual aids and textual evidence, knowing that she would be the one presenting most of it. Tyler and Jessica barely showed up for the few meetings she scheduled, and when they did, their contributions were minimal at best. The day of the presentation arrived, and Maya stood in front of the class, her project board propped up behind her. She had spent hours perfecting every detail, making sure her analysis was clear, concise, and well supported. She was ready. But as soon as she began, Mrs. Thompson's gaze locked onto her with an intensity that made Maya's skin crawl. Maya launched into her presentation, discussing the themes of racial injustice and moral courage in To Kill a Mockingbird. She had structured her argument carefully, drawing parallels between the novel's portrayal of systemic racism and its relevance in modern society. She felt confident, her voice steady as she spoke. Then, Mrs. Thompson interrupted. "Excuse me, Maya," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Don't you think you're overemphasizing the racial aspect of the novel? It's important, of course, but you seem to be fixated on it." A ripple of unease passed through the classroom. Maya's heart raced, but she kept her composure. "I believe the racial themes are central to the novel's message," Maya replied, her voice steady. Harper Lee herself said that. Yes, we're all familiar with what Harper Lee said," Mrs. Thompson cut in, waving her hand dismissively. "But I think you're missing the broader point. To Kill a Mockingbird is about universal human experiences, not just race." Maya's chest tightened. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some curious, others uncomfortable. Jessica and Tyler exchanged amused glances, clearly enjoying the spectacle. But Maya refused to back down. "I understand that," Maya said, her voice quieter now but still firm. "But I think it's important to acknowledge the racial injustice in the book and how it reflects." "That's enough," Mrs. Thompson snapped, her smile gone now, replaced by a cold, sharp look. "Let's move on." Maya stood there for a moment, frozen in place. She had done everything right. She had prepared, she had researched, and she had spoken with confidence. But none of it mattered. Mrs. Thompson had already decided that Maya's perspective wasn't valid. Slowly, Maya gathered her things and returned to her seat. Her mind raced, her thoughts swirling in frustration and humiliation. Around her, the other students whispered and murmured, but Maya couldn't hear them. All she could hear was the echo of Mrs. Thompson's words, cutting her down like she was nothing. Maya walked out of Mrs. Thompson's English class, feeling a knot of frustration tightening in her chest. The humiliation from the presentation still stung, but what bothered her even more was the sense of injustice, as though no matter how hard she tried, her voice would never truly be heard. She had come to Riverview High with high hopes, ready to prove herself in this elite academic environment, but now she felt like she was constantly battling invisible barriers. She headed to her locker, trying to shake off the weight of Mrs. Thompson's dismissive words. The halls buzzed with the usual energy of students rushing between classes, their voices a mix of excitement and indifference. Maya spotted Rachel Johnson, her best friend from her old school, who had moved to Riverview last year. Rachel had been her anchor during the transition, the only familiar face in a sea of strangers. Rachel waved at her from down the hall. "Hey, Maya, you okay?" Maya smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just, English class." Rachel's expression softened. "Mrs. Thompson again?" Maya sighed, leaning against her locker. "She shot down my entire presentation. I worked so hard on it, but it's like nothing I say matters to her." Rachel frowned, her brow furrowed with concern. "That's so unfair. Do you think it's because—" Maya nodded. They both knew what Rachel was getting at, even if she didn't say it outright. It was becoming more obvious to Maya that Mrs. Thompson's behavior wasn't just about academic standards, it was personal, and likely rooted in biases that Maya couldn't control. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked. "I don't know," Maya admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't want to make it a bigger deal than it is, but at the same time it's hard to just keep letting it happen." Rachel gave her a supportive smile. "You know you can always talk to your dad about it. He'd back you up." Maya nodded, but the idea of involving her father made her uneasy. David Anderson was a well-respected figure in the community. He had recently become the president of the Riverview School Board, and Maya knew he would support her if she told him what was going on. But something inside her hesitated. She didn't want to seem like she was running to her father for help. She wanted to handle this on her own. "I'll think about it," Maya said, closing her locker. "Right now, I just want to get through the day." As they headed to their next class, Maya couldn't shake the growing sense that something had to change. Mrs. Thompson's attitude wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was an obstacle that was starting to affect Maya's ability to succeed in class. And deep down, Maya knew that this was more than just about her grades. It was about being seen, being heard, and being treated with the respect she deserved. The next few weeks were a test of Maya's patience. Mrs. Thompson's subtle attacks on her work continued, each one chipping away at Maya's confidence. Whenever she tried to contribute to class discussions, Mrs. Thompson either ignored her or interrupted with condescending comments about missing the bigger picture or focusing too much on race. Maya had learned to brace herself whenever she spoke up, expecting the criticism that would inevitably follow. But Maya wasn't the only one who had noticed. Some of the other students had begun to pick up on the tension between Mrs. Thompson and Maya. Sarah Mitchell, a quiet girl who sat in the front row, would occasionally glance over at Maya during class, her expression sympathetic. Even Jason Richards, one of the more popular boys in class, seemed to be paying more attention to the way Mrs. Thompson treated Maya. At first, no one said anything. The unspoken rules of the classroom dictated that you didn't question the teacher, especially not someone as well regarded as Mrs. Thompson. But as the weeks went on, the weight of the situation became harder to ignore. One afternoon, during a discussion about To Kill a Mockingbird, Mrs. Thompson asked the class to analyze Atticus Finch's closing argument in the trial of Tom Robinson. Maya raised her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had a strong point to make about the parallels between Atticus's defense and the modern-day struggles for racial justice, but she also knew that Mrs. Thompson wouldn't be thrilled about it. Sure enough, when Mrs. Thompson finally called on her, her voice was laced with thinly veiled skepticism. "Maya, do you have something to add?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her smile tight. "Yes," Maya said, steadying her voice. "I think Atticus's argument goes beyond just the specifics of the trial. He's calling out the entire system of racial injustice in Maycomb, and I think that's still relevant today. We're still dealing with the same issues, systemic racism and prejudice, just like Tom Robinson did. A ripple of unease passed through the classroom. A few students shifted in their seats while others exchanged nervous glances. Maya felt the tension rise, but she kept going. It's not just about one case, it's about the larger issues in society, Maya continued, feeling more confident as she spoke. Harper Lee was writing about the way racism is built into the system, and we're still dealing with that today. It's important to recognize that. Mrs. Thompson's expression hardened. That's certainly one way to look at it, she said, her voice icy. But I think you're overextending the text. Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird as a work of fiction, not a political manifesto. Maya opened her mouth to respond, but Mrs. Thompson cut her off with a wave of her hand. We should be careful not to impose modern political agendas onto classic literature. It's important to focus on the author's intentions. Maya's jaw clenched, her frustration bubbling to the surface. This wasn't about imposing an agenda. It was about acknowledging the reality of the novel and the world they lived in. But it was clear that Mrs. Thompson didn't want to have that conversation. As the class continued, Maya felt a familiar sense of isolation wash over her. But this time, something was different. As she glanced around the room, she noticed Sarah Mitchell watching her with a concerned expression. And then, to Maya's surprise, Jason Richards raised his hand. Actually, I think Maya's got a point, Jason said, his voice hesitant but clear. I mean, the whole book is about racism, right? So it makes sense that we'd talk about how it connects to what's happening today. Maya's heart leapt. She hadn't expected anyone to back her up, let alone someone like Jason. Mrs. Thompson's expression darkened, but she quickly regained her composure. Well, Jason, Mrs. Thompson said, her tone patronizing, I appreciate your input, but let's not get distracted by tangents. We need to stay focused on the text. Jason shrugged, clearly not willing to push the issue further, but the fact that he had spoken up at all gave Maya a flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. After class, as Maya gathered her things, Sarah approached her. You were right, you know, Sarah said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Mrs. Thompson doesn't like talking about race, but that's what the book is about. It's not fair how she keeps shutting you down. Maya looked at Sarah, surprised by the sudden show of solidarity. Thanks, she said, offering a small smile. It's just frustrating, you know? Sarah nodded. Yeah, I can tell, but don't let her get to you. You're smarter than she gives you credit for. Maya's heart warmed at the kind words, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that things were getting worse, not better. Mrs. Thompson's behavior wasn't just frustrating, it was wearing her down. And as much as she wanted to believe she could handle it on her own, Maya was starting to realize that this battle might be bigger than her. The final straw came during a midterm exam review session. Mrs. Thompson had prepared a series of practice questions for the class, meant to help them prepare for the upcoming essay portion of the test. Maya had been taking meticulous notes, determined to do well despite the obstacles Mrs. Thompson had put in her path. As the class worked through one of the questions, Maya raised her hand to ask for clarification on a point that had been bothering her. Mrs. Thompson, who had been pacing at the front of the room, glanced at Maya with a look of irritation. Yes, Maya, she asked, her voice tinged with impatience. I just wanted to ask about the way we're supposed to approach the essay, Maya began. Are we allowed to focus on specific themes, or do you want us to cover all the major points from the book? Mrs. Thompson's lips thinned, her eyes narrowing. I would assume, Maya, that by this point in the semester, you'd know how to write an essay. Or do you need me to walk you through it step by step? A few students snickered, and Maya's cheeks burned with humiliation. She opened her mouth to respond, but Mrs. Thompson continued before she could get a word in. If you're having trouble understanding basic instructions, perhaps you should consider whether this class is the right fit for you," Mrs. Thompson said, her tone dripping with condescension. The room fell silent. Maya sat frozen in her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. Mrs. Thompson's words hung in the air, sharp and cruel, cutting through Maya's composure. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a public attack on her intelligence, her capabilities. And for the first time, Maya felt something inside her snap. She had been patient. She had been quiet. She had tried to stay composed, to prove herself through hard work and determination. But now, sitting in front of her classmates with Mrs. Thompson's words ringing in her ears, Maya realized that no amount of effort would ever be enough. Mrs. Thompson had already decided who Maya was, and nothing Maya did would change that. Maya's hands clenched into fists under her desk, her body trembling with anger and frustration. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, watching, waiting to see what she would do. But Maya didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat felt tight, her voice trapped behind the wall of emotions building inside her. Instead, she gathered her things, her movements stiff and jerky, and left the classroom without a word. In this section, the tension between Maya and Mrs. Thompson intensifies, leading to small moments of resistance and solidarity from Maya's classmates, particularly Sarah and Jason. However, Mrs. Thompson's behavior continues to escalate, culminating in a public humiliation that leaves Maya feeling deeply alienated and frustrated. The climax of this part signals a shift in Maya's internal struggle as she realizes that she can no longer fight this battle alone, leading to the inevitable confrontation that will follow in the next part of the story. Maya sat in her bedroom that evening, staring blankly at her open notebook, the lines on the page blurred by the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. She had left Mrs. Thompson's classroom in a fog of anger, her humiliation raw and fresh. The walk home had done nothing to soothe the fire burning in her chest. Her father, David Anderson, would be home soon, and she knew it was time to tell him everything. For weeks, she had tried to manage it on her own. She had put up with the subtle jabs, the dismissals, the outright hostility. She had wanted to believe that if she worked hard enough, she could prove herself to Mrs. Thompson. But now she realized that no amount of hard work would change Mrs. Thompson's mind. This wasn't about her academic abilities. This was about something far more insidious. The door creaked open, and her father's deep voice filled the entryway. "Maya, I'm home." Maya stood up from her desk, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. When she stepped out into the hallway, she found him hanging his coat in the closet, his face warm with a tired but genuine smile. "Hey, kiddo, how was school?" David asked, his tone light as he walked into the kitchen. Maya followed him, her throat tightening. This was the moment she had been dreading. "Dad, can we talk for a minute?" David looked up from the fridge, sensing the seriousness in her voice. He closed the door and gave her his full attention. "Of course. What's going on?" Maya sat down at the kitchen table, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times, but now that the moment was here, she wasn't sure where to start. Finally, she just blurted it out. "It's Mrs. Thompson," Maya said, her voice strained. "She's been treating me differently ever since I got to Riverview. At first I thought it was just in my head, but it's not. She won't let me contribute in class, and when I do, she finds a way to tear me down. Today, she basically told me I didn't belong in her class." David's brow furrowed, his face darkening with concern. "What do you mean she told you that?" Maya recounted the events of the last few weeks, how Mrs. Thompson had ignored her, belittled her work, and dismissed her contributions. She told him about the group project where she had done all the work and how Mrs. Thompson had cut her off during her presentation. She explained how she had tried to stay calm, to play by the rules, but nothing she did seemed to matter. David listened carefully, his jaw clenched as he processed everything his daughter was saying. When she was finished, there was a long silence. "I didn't want to bother you with this," Maya said quietly. "I know you have a lot on your plate with work and the school board, but I don't know what else to do." David's expression softened. "Maya, you're not bothering me. This is important, and I'm so sorry you've had to go through this alone." He sat down across from her, his hands resting on the table. "You've done everything right, and it's not fair that this teacher is treating you this way. But now that I know what's going on, we're going to handle it. I'll talk to Principal Richardson first thing tomorrow." Maya felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Part of her was grateful that her father was stepping in, but another part of her feared the consequences. What if Mrs. Thompson retaliated? What if things got worse? But deep down, she knew that things couldn't stay the way they were. Something had to change. The following day, David Anderson wasted no time. He called Principal Richardson, requesting a meeting to discuss Mrs. Thompson's behavior. Principal Richardson, though surprised by the call, agreed to meet with David right away. As president of the school board, David carried a lot of weight in the community, and his involvement signaled that this was more than just a concerned parent. It was a matter of institutional accountability. The meeting took place in Principal Richardson's office, a spacious room with polished wooden furniture and walls lined with academic awards and photographs of school events. David sat across from the principal, his face serious but calm. "David, I'm surprised to hear there's an issue with Mrs. Thompson," Principal Richardson said, leaning back in his chair. "She's one of our most respected teachers. What seems to be the problem?" David didn't waste time on pleasantries. "My daughter, Maya, is in Mrs. Thompson's English class. For weeks she's been subjected to unfair treatment, being ignored, belittled, and publicly humiliated in front of her classmates. Maya has tried to handle it on her own, but it's clear that this has gone beyond acceptable behavior." Principal Richardson frowned, folding his hands on the desk. "That's a serious accusation. Has Maya reported any of this before?" David shook his head. "She didn't want to stir up trouble, but now it's reached a point where something needs to be done. This isn't just a case of a teacher being tough on a student. It's about bias, racial bias to be specific." Richardson's face tightened. He knew the gravity of that accusation. "Racial bias? Are you certain?" David's voice was firm. "I've listened to Maya recount multiple incidents where Mrs. Thompson has gone out of her way to undermine her contributions, particularly when it comes to discussions of race and To Kill a Mockingbird. She dismisses Maya's insights, cuts her off, and even makes comments that suggest Maya doesn't belong in the honors class. This isn't about Maya's academic performance, it's about how she's being treated because of who she is." Principal Richardson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I understand your concern, David. I take any allegations of bias very seriously. But Mrs. Thompson has been with this school for years, and her track record speaks for itself. I find it hard to believe she would intentionally single out a student in this way." David's eyes darkened with frustration. "I'm not asking you to question her entire career, Principal Richardson. I'm asking you to address what's happening right now. Maya's education is being compromised because of this teacher's actions, and that can't continue. We need to take this seriously." Principal Richardson nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "I agree that it's important to address any concerns. I'll speak with Mrs. Thompson and conducted an internal review of her classroom practices. In the meantime, I'll make sure Maya is treated fairly moving forward." David leaned forward slightly, his voice low and controlled. "I hope you understand, Principal Richardson, that this isn't just about fairness. It's about ensuring that every student at Riverview High is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of race. If this issue isn't addressed properly, I won't hesitate to escalate it to the school board." The threat, though subtle, hung in the air between them. Principal Richardson knew that if David Anderson brought this issue to the board, it would become a public matter, one that could reflect poorly on the administration. "I understand," Richardson said, his tone measured. "I'll handle it." David stood, offering a tight but respectful nod. "Thank you. I look forward to hearing the results of your review." As David left the office, he felt a surge of determination. He had done his part, and now the ball was in Principal Richardson's court. But as he walked down the hallway, passing students and teachers, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Word spread quickly through Riverview High that something was happening between Maya Anderson and Mrs. Thompson. The students noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere when Principal Richardson visited Mrs. Thompson's classroom later that day, quietly observing the lesson from the back of the room. There was a tension in the air, and though no one knew the details, everyone sensed that something important was brewing. Maya, for her part, did her best to focus on her work and stay out of the spotlight. But it wasn't easy. Her classmates had started whispering about her, speculating on what was going on between her and Mrs. Thompson. Some students, like Tyler Green and Jessica Carter, seemed to find the whole situation amusing, making snide remarks under their breath during class. "So, Maya, is your dad going to get Mrs. Thompson fired?" Tyler whispered one afternoon as they sat in the back row. Maya ignored him, her jaw clenched in frustration. She wasn't interested in engaging with their childish behavior. She knew why they were acting this way. Tyler and Jessica thrived on drama, and to them this was just another high school scandal. But for Maya, it was far more serious than that. Not everyone was unsympathetic, though. Sarah Mitchell, who had become more vocal in her support of Maya since the class discussion weeks earlier, approached her after class one day. "Hey, Maya," Sarah said, her voice hesitant but kind. "I just wanted to say, I think it's really brave what you're doing, standing up for yourself like that." Maya smiled, grateful for the support. "Thanks, Sarah. It's been tough, but I couldn't keep letting it happen." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I can't imagine what it's been like. Mrs. Thompson can be intense. But you're right to speak up. If more people did that, maybe things would change." Maya's smile widened slightly. She had always liked Sarah. She was quiet, but there was a strength in her that Maya admired. And hearing Sarah voice her support gave Maya a small but much-needed boost of confidence. The following week brought a tension that seemed to hang over the entire school. Principal Richardson's review of Mrs. Thompson's classroom had been swift, and by Friday the results were in. There was an announcement over the loudspeaker, calling both Maya and Mrs. Thompson to the principal's office at the end of the day. Maya felt her stomach twist with nerves as she made her way down the quiet halls. She hadn't spoken to Mrs. Thompson since the investigation began, but she could feel the coldness radiating from her every time they were in the same room. Maya wondered if the teacher knew what was coming, if she understood the full gravity of her actions. When Maya reached the office, she found Principal Richardson already seated behind his desk, Mrs. Thompson standing stiffly by the window. The air in the room was thick with tension. "Please sit down," Principal Richardson said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. Maya took a seat, her heart pounding. Mrs. Thompson remained by the window, her face pale and unreadable. "I've conducted a thorough review of the situation," Principal Richardson began, folding his hands on the desk. "After speaking with several students and observing the classroom environment, it's become clear that Mrs. Thompson's treatment of you, Maya, was inappropriate and unprofessional." Mrs. Thompson's face tightened, but she didn't speak. "Maya," Richardson continued, "I want to commend you for bringing this issue to light. It takes courage to stand up when something isn't right, and your actions have brought attention to a serious problem." Maya nodded, though her throat felt tight. She wasn't used to this kind of formal praise, and it felt strange to hear it in this context. "As for Mrs. Thompson," Richardson said, turning his gaze toward the teacher, "I've decided that disciplinary action is necessary. Mrs. Thompson, you'll be placed on administrative leave for the remainder of the semester while we determine the next steps." Maya felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the cold, silent presence of Mrs. Thompson in the room. She didn't expect an apology or acknowledgement from the teacher, but the weight of the conflict hung heavy between them. Mrs. Thompson finally spoke, her voice low and controlled. "I've dedicated my life to teaching. Everything I've done has been in the best interest of my students. If there were misunderstandings, I regret that. But I stand by my methods." Maya met her gaze, feeling a flicker of anger but also a strange sense of pity. Mrs. Thompson wasn't going to admit her mistakes, but Maya had done what she needed to do. She had stood up for herself, and now, finally, there would be consequences. The meeting ended shortly after, and as Maya left the office, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't a complete victory. There was still so much work to be done to address the systemic issues at Riverview, but it was a start. Maya walked out of Principal Richardson's office, her heart still racing from the confrontation. The halls of Riverview High were quieter than usual, with most students already heading home for the weekend. She breathed in the cool afternoon air as she stepped outside, letting it wash over her. A sense of relief mixed with lingering tension. As Maya reached the school gate, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Rachel. "Heard about Mrs. T. Are you okay? Proud of you." Maya smiled softly at the screen. Rachel had been her rock through all of this, and now, with Mrs. Thompson officially facing consequences, it felt like the clouds were finally breaking. But it wasn't just about her. It was about what this meant for other students, those who would come after her and face similar challenges. Maybe, just maybe, her actions had started a ripple effect. At home that evening, Maya sat with her father over dinner. David Anderson, always a figure of strength and stability in her life, had been nothing but supportive through this ordeal. He had told her that change wasn't always swift, but it was necessary, and standing up for herself was the first step toward something bigger. "You know, Maya," David said, setting down his fork, "I'm proud of the way you've handled all of this. You didn't just react, you thought things through. You've shown more strength than most adults I know." Maya smiled, but it was a small one. "I still can't believe she never really admitted what she did was wrong." David gave her a steady look. "People like Mrs. Thompson don't always see their actions for what they are. They see themselves as the gatekeepers of order, and they think their way is the right way. That doesn't excuse it, though. What matters is that the school acknowledged it, and now there are consequences." Maya nodded. "It just feels like this is only part of the problem." Her father leaned back in his chair. "You're right, there's a bigger picture, and the truth is, it's not just about one teacher. It's about the system. The way certain behaviors and biases go unnoticed until someone is brave enough to call them out. What you did, speaking up, was the first step. Now the real work begins." Maya reflected on that. As hard as the last few months had been, she had sparked something, a movement that was already shifting the attitudes of her peers. The thought of other students who might have faced similar challenges before her or who would have faced them after her weighed heavily on her mind. Maybe her fight with Mrs. Thompson wasn't just about their personal conflict. Maybe it was about creating a safer, more inclusive environment for everyone. In the weeks following Mrs. Thompson's leave, Riverview High felt different. The administration introduced new guidelines for teachers that included mandatory diversity training and an updated curriculum focused on inclusivity. David Anderson, in his role on the school board, had been instrumental in pushing these initiatives forward, and Maya knew her experience had played a role in these changes. The whispers in the hallways gradually faded, and Maya felt less like the center of attention. For the first time in months, she could walk into her English class, now led by a substitute teacher, Mr. Calloway, without the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. Mr. Calloway was younger, more open to discussion, and seemed genuinely interested in hearing what all the students had to say. His approach to Kill a Mockingbird was different from Mrs. Thompson's. Rather than focusing solely on literary merit, he encouraged students to think about how the book's themes applied to modern society. One afternoon, as the class discussed the book's closing chapters, Sarah Mitchell raised her hand and looked nervously toward Maya. I just wanted to say that I think it's important that we look at how the justice system in the book mirrors issues we're still facing today, Sarah said, her voice wavering slightly. I mean, the way Tom Robinson is treated, it's not just historical. It's still happening. Maya smiled softly as she listened. Sarah had been quiet for most of the year, but something had changed in her too. Maya wasn't the only one who had grown from this experience. Sarah, and even other students who had remained silent before, were beginning to find their voices. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Sarah caught up with Maya in the hallway. "You know," Sarah began, hesitating slightly, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened with Mrs. Thompson and how I didn't speak up sooner. I should have. I'm sorry." Maya turned to her, surprised by the apology but grateful. "It's okay, Sarah. I know it's not easy to speak up, especially when you're afraid of making things worse. I just wish I had done something," Sarah continued, her voice earnest. "But now I want to help. I heard they're starting that cultural awareness club next semester. I'd like to be part of that." Maya felt a surge of warmth. The Cultural Awareness Club had been one of the initiatives introduced after the events with Mrs. Thompson, and the school administration had asked Maya if she would help lead it. She had been hesitant at first, unsure if she wanted to be the face of a movement she hadn't asked for. But hearing Sarah's words, Maya realized that this was exactly why she had to do it. "Of course," Maya said, her voice firm with conviction. "I'd love to have you on board." As they walked down the hallway together, Maya felt lighter than she had in months. Things weren't perfect. There were still students like Tyler Green and Jessica Carter who rolled their eyes at the changes, and there were still moments where Maya felt the weight of everything she had been through. But for the first time, she felt like she had made a real difference. She wasn't just enduring anymore. She was shaping the future. By the time spring rolled around, Riverview High had undergone noticeable changes. The Cultural Awareness Club had grown in numbers, with more students than Maya had expected signing up to join. They held discussions on topics ranging from the representation of minority voices in literature to the history of systemic racism in education. The conversations weren't always easy, but they were necessary. One afternoon, the club organized an event where they invited guest speakers from the community to talk about their experiences with prejudice and the importance of inclusivity in schools. Maya sat at the front, watching as her peers engaged in discussions that, just a few months earlier, would have seemed impossible. After the event, Principal Richardson approached Maya. His expression was warmer than it had been during their earlier meetings, and there was a look of genuine respect in his eyes. "Maya," he began, "I want to thank you for everything you've done this year. What you started here, it's making a real difference. I'm sorry it took so long for us to see it, but I'm grateful that you stood up for what was right." Maya felt a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "Thank you, Principal Richardson. I just want things to be better for everyone who comes after me." "They will be," he said, his tone firm. "You've set an example for this school and for me. I'll make sure we keep moving in the right direction." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the principal's words. There was still work to be done, but Riverview High was changing, and she had been part of that change. As the school year came to a close, Maya reflected on everything that had happened. She had entered Riverview High as an outsider, unsure of where she fit in or whether she could meet the school's high expectations. Now, she was leaving her junior year as someone who had fought for her voice to be heard, and won. There had been battles, both internal and external. She had faced humiliation, anger, and frustration, but she had also found strength she didn't know she had. Her experience with Mrs. Thompson had revealed the cracks in the school's foundation, but it had also shown Maya that change was possible, even in the face of deep-rooted prejudice. As Maya packed up her locker on the last day of school, she caught sight of her reflection in the metal door. She wasn't the same girl who had walked through these halls in September, nervous and unsure. She had grown, not just academically, but as a person. Someone who could lead, who could inspire others to stand up against injustice. Outside, the sun shone brightly, and as Maya stepped into the courtyard, she saw Rachel and Sarah waiting for her. They waved, their smiles full of warmth and excitement for the summer ahead. Maya walked toward them, feeling lighter, freer. She had found her place at Riverview High, not by blending in, but by standing out and standing up. And this was only the beginning. Maya's journey through Riverview High culminates in a victory that goes beyond her personal struggle. Her battle with Mrs. Thompson and the institutional prejudice she faced is a catalyst for broader change at the school, inspiring new initiatives that focus on inclusivity and justice. Throughout the story, Maya grows from a student battling against bias to a leader in her community, sparking conversations that ripple beyond the walls of her school. By the end of the story, Maya has not only found her voice, but has empowered others to find theirs as well, leaving a legacy that will shape the future of Riverview High for years to come. Silent Resistance is a story about resilience, the courage to stand up for what is right, and the lasting impact one voice can have in the face of systemic injustice. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more inspiring content.